Well, g'day there. I'm here with Mark Cameron. Mark is the rural spokesperson for the ACT Party, and also he is number 8 on the ACT Party list. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, David. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Look, I'm a Northern dairy farmer. I've just sort of zoomed in. I'm sorry, desperately sorry I couldn't be down with you. Obviously, the COVID environment has completely destroyed any meetings but in person. But yeah, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been milking cows in Northland and Ruawai for 32 years. Really cool place, actually, out on the clay, on the Kaipara clay. But you farmers, dairy farmers, sheep and beef farmers would certainly identify with what's gone on. In the current government, we've been left behind. I can quite candidly tell you I've had an absolute guts ache with it. And I imagine a whole heap of you have too. So if we were to unpack it, let's do that. Let's unpack it for what it is.
Well, just a second, Mark, before we go any further, can we just get to the bottom of what's going on here? I'm putting you big screen here, and what I'm seeing is you appear to be on a bus.
Yes.
You appear to have Freedom, the Change Your Future bus tour mascot, with you. And Freedom appears to have a knitted mask. So is Freedom concerned about COVID-19?
Oh, look, we're worried about the runaway disease, but I mean, I think Freedom has had his or her freedom of speech completely capitulated with that one. They put the mask on it, so yeah, we've just thrown it over Freedom now.
Oh, good on you. Well, look, so basically, just for people who are joining us and wonder what's going on with the whole situation of the election campaign during this latest outbreak. We've got our special mascot, Freedom, on the bus, but more importantly, the bus is currently stopped in the Waikato where our Change Your Future tour would have been. We have stopped campaigning for a couple of days because it's not clear quite what's going to happen with the situation. But we are shifting our events to digital. And this is what people are having to do, particularly in Auckland right now, but have had to do up and down the country, is just be a bit resourceful when things change. It's the old number 8 wire mentality. So we're carrying on all our events today. We would have been talking to folks in Morrinsville. We're being live cast in Morrinsville. We're also simulcasting across Facebook and YouTube. And I just want to say a big hello to everybody. And thank you for joining us. So that's just a little bit of context, but let's welcome Mark back. You're just giving us a bit of an intro about where you've come from and why you're standing for ACT.
Yeah, look, first things I want to do is actually celebrate farmers, if I can. Farmers are bloody good people. They've had a hard time of it, and I honestly believe it. It's a heartfelt thing, reality for me. I've lived in Northern for a long time. I've had the misfortune of bearing 4 of my farming friends, and I think we've all felt it in some degree or another. Oh, gracious me, I was just reading the freshwater policy. Every day there's another set of rules or compliances that we as cow cockies or the sheep and beef boys or our growers actually have to cope with, and it's eroded our freedoms and our everyday farming lives. So I'm the real spokesperson for the party. I would desperately like to be part of a reality where we can fix the rot. I mean, we've lost our pride. I know colleagues in Northland that will all too often not allude to the fact that they're farmers, because there is this lens that urban New Zealand all too often looks through. We unfortunately have all heard about dirty dye in museums. That was something that we felt deeply aggrieved about. We've got to have an honest conversation. We love the environment. We live and work in the farming environment every day. But it's more than anything, guys. It's our rural communities. We've got the local motorcycle man. We've got all manner of small businesses that are part of a metaphorical hub that keep rural New Zealand alive. And I really want to bring David in, but just quickly, when you really look at it, we've got the Zero Carbon Initiative, we've got the ETS framework which has brought in methane, and we all know that, gracious, that's bloody hell, that's idiotic. We've got the freshwater initiative, which is really.
Let me jump back in and just cover off a few of those things. The first thing you said that I think is really worth picking up on is you said, look, I guess morale of folks in the rural sector has really been beaten down. And I just want to sort of come in and ask you about some of your personal experiences. There's a story that you've told me where your daughter was made to write an essay that really was almost about asking her to incriminate her parents. And I know I brought this up with you a few times in different forums.
No, look, you've got every right to. It was, and this is, I'm not one for fictional or conflation. My daughter was actually asked at high school to write an article about why farming in New Zealand was bad for the environment. And I think you good people of Morrinsville, it wouldn't matter, anyone in farming in New Zealand just knows how egregious that is. This is a rural school asking a child who attended a rural school to write an article or an essay about why she believed farmers were in fact bad for the environment, not if in fact they were. So already it's now crept into the curriculum at school, and I think that's a bloody disgrace. We're good people. We're actually the best conservationists of the land. I really believe it.
So we've just had a question from Brian, who's one of our original live in-person attendees at our Morrinsville event that we were planning to be at today. He's asking about the Zero Carbon Act. Now, I can tell you ACT was the only party to vote against it. And I can talk a bit more about why we did that. But from the point of view of someone who walks the talk and is a farming a dairy farmer is where I'm trying to get to. How's the Zero Carbon Act being perceived in Ruawai and across the dairy industry?
Oh, look, I think it's an evisceration of private rights. There's the climate change minister is going to have unvetted powers. We're deeply concerned about that. The afforestation that the Zero Carbon Initiative will ultimately bring about, you've got 1 billion trees. Well, we argue, well, where do 1 billion trees go? The Conservation Department, and you guys can do a bit of background checking on this, had sort of said, hey, look, there's 200 million trees in conservation land. Well, gracious me, where do 1 billion trees go? And quite candidly, if the 1 billion trees go in, productivity in rural New Zealand evaporates. And more intrinsically linked in all that is all the small businesses that are the grease in the metaphorical wheel that keep us farmers alive. So it's not just the farmers, it's a real metaphorical rot from the inside out. Rural New Zealand disappears.
I just want to ask a little bit about the freshwater regulations. So again, a lot of people are very worried about this. They find it quite costly. And I know that Dairy NZ have asked, is there really good cost-benefit analysis? Will the benefits of this fencing regime outweigh the costs? I think that's a valid question for people to be asking. Now, surely in Ruawai, everything's pretty flat. You don't have too many streams. But what's the impact of this across dairy land?
Oh, look, I think the thing is farmers in general have done a lot. Look, we've done about 54,000 Ks around New Zealand in terms of stock exclusion fencing. Most farmers have never been given any credit for that at all. That's a generational thing, and this government has no scope of just what it takes to put up that sort of magnitude of stock exclusion fencing. We do it for the welfare issue as much as the fresh water.
So let me get this clear. So farmers, are aware that it's better to keep cows and other livestock out of streams. Correct. And they've been building fences to exclude them for a long time.
Correct.
Are you saying that these new regulations from the government don't acknowledge the efforts that have already been made?
It's my honest belief that is the case, yes. And the simple fact is, we are also acutely aware of the damage to the water source if animals go on it. We want to protect it. We're not have an aversion to putting up fences to look after the freshwater reality, but we've done it for decades. And the simple fact is this government has never acknowledged that reality. Sadly, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, David.
No, you're not interrupting me. I was listening and nodding and murmuring in agreement.
Yeah, sorry. Sadly, we do have to have the honest conversation about what we've done, how damnably good at we are at it, and the simple fact is, and this is not a dig at our urban counterparts. If you actually frame that against what the Auckland City Council does with its $1 billion, unfortunately, some of the beaches get shut down in summer with human waste. Well, the odd cow that jumps a fence that we as farmers have to maintain at our own personal cost is not a fair and honest conversation. We've done a lot of stock exclusion, and we should be given the credit for it.
I've just got a question by Blair Jameson. The fencing issue is compounded by fencing in flooding areas. FMG won't insure it, so farmers must be required to rebuild fences on an annual basis. But if a flood takes out your fence, then you've got to basically rebuild it, and you're being regulated to do that every year.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. And therein lies the travesty. I was just going through the freshwater plan for Northland, and I know a lot of farmers be looking at it for other parts of the country. They know regional topography, look, the annual rainfall, the natural erosion all plays into it. The government's umbrella approach quite often is very one-eyed. And again, I just go straight back to it. We've put a large degree of this mitigation in place, and it has not been acknowledged.
I just want to change gears to a question by Paulus Wessex, who says, what's your take on an ex-policy around economic New Zealand agriculture's reliance on China and the security implications that might have? We have two competing interests here. MFAT pushes more deals with China, while the intelligence community voices concern about how reliant we are on becoming on that country in particular, and how can be used to control or manipulate government policy actions. I think this is something that's really worth talking about, because ACT has always been a party of free trade. I'm a free trader. I think free trade and free markets have done more to alleviate human poverty than any other concept or policy in human history, and we should be really pleased about that. On the other hand, it is true that we now face people such as the faction currently in power in Beijing, the CCP, who don't play by the same rules that we hoped. I think it's time that we accept that, when we let China into the WTO at the year 2000, and then we, had a free trade agreement with China in 2008, the things that we hoped for at that time have not been delivered. We have not seen the Chinese government become more democratic, more liberal, or more respectful of human rights in that period. In fact, actually, they've gone some distance in the opposite direction. President Xi has consolidated political power around the Communist Party in a way that we hadn't seen before. So, look, I think that we have every right and obligation to be pretty concerned about the way that things are playing out there. And so then the next question is, well, what's ACT's policy? Well, we're not in favor of restricting trade. I think there's got to be a clear signal to people in business that, the relationship may not be as good as it has been, and therefore we are going to have to start looking at China in a different way. And a lot of businesses I know are already pivoting away from reliance on China because it's in their interest to do so. So long as they've got clear signals from governments about where things are going. I'd also just make one point. This is not in any way anti-Chinese. So the people who are most aggressive in telling me that we need to think carefully about the way that Beijing behaves are actually our New Zealand Chinese friends. So when it comes to that issue, it's actually the people that have the most experience with the CCP who are kind of the most aggressive on it. And I think this is an issue where we really have to be honest about the situation we're in. We've got quite a lot of exposure, I guess, to the Chinese market. We can't stop that tomorrow, but we can, of course, start to think about how we build our global links. And so finally, what would ACT say? Well, we would say we need to make it easier for people from democratic, OECD-friendly countries to invest here. So if your investment originates in a Canada or a South Korea or a UK or, a Spain or America, then we actually want to make it easier for you to invest in New Zealand, get New Zealand better connected with democratic countries around the world, because I think we need to build those connections over the next decade or so. Paula says, thank you for your answer. Glad you're open to talking about it. Certainly am, but I feel like I've now cut into Mark's rural policy discussion. So look, another thing, Mark, that I know comes up whenever I go outside of, latte land, is that, people in rural New Zealand are especially worried about the Resource Management Act. And they're actually offended by the fact that it makes it difficult for them to actually develop and use their own property. Now, every National Party leader says they're going to reform the Resource Management Act ever since at least 2003. Brash, Key, and all of the more recent leaders, too many to name, have said they want to replace the Resource Management Act. I think one thing that's clear is that a party vote for ACT is a party vote to replace the Resource Management Act with a law that is more respectful of private property rights. That's my starting point. But Mark, what do you say when it comes to the RMA, and what are some of the practical impacts of land use regulation on using your property?
Oh, look, it's that's an egregious bit of legislation. I'll give the viewing audience a bit of an insight to what I saw here in Northern Chat. Well, not here, sorry, but up in Northern Chat. A friend of mine was trying to build a dam on a 1,000-acre property. Got up 3 meters and had all sorts of regulations and potential fines thrown at him for that. Now, that's just an obscenity logic. The simple fact is, the RMA is such an onerous bit of legislation. It's the slow-moving leviathan, really erodes our potentiality to prosper. We're pragmatists and critical thinkers. We're pretty bloody clever people, farmers, and routinely we on the ground, there's just too much red tape involved in the lives of rural New Zealanders. I think most cow cockies, most farmers, most horticulturalists and growers, they're acutely aware this legislation needs to be repealed and replaced. We've got to get back to business. And one thing I'll just touch on, you guys as farmers are damnably good at what you do. And in this uncertain reality, we're all living in COVID-19, which has now just reared its ugly head again. We have the potentiality to be the driving force about getting this country back on track. And I really think red tape is getting in the way of that. So we as that party need to repeal and replace it and actually let our farmers get back to business.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. And I just feel it's time to make a party political broadcast. I think probably the least sexy thing I've ever advocated in politics is our regulatory constitution. But I keep banging on about it because it really matters. A regulatory constitution is about improving the quality of regulation. It means making politicians answer certain questions before they make a law. What is this law for? What problem is it trying to solve? What are the costs of this law? What are the benefits of this law? Do the benefits outweigh the costs? Does this law impair private property rights? Does this law have other laws that have already solved the problem? And if so, why do we need this one? If we were to force politicians to answer those questions every time they make a law, first of all, they wouldn't create so many. That'd probably be good. But the ones they did create would actually be higher quality, because sometimes we do need laws and regulations. I'm the first to admit that there's laws that we need. But the ones that we have too often are there. It's not even clear what problem they're solving. The costs of the law outweigh the benefits of it, and we all get poorer and spend too much of our lives complying with laws that do not work. And I'll just give you one example from another field. Oil and gas exploration ban. Well, what problem are we trying to solve? Well, apparently global emissions of carbon dioxide. Okay, so how is it supposed to work? What are the benefits? Well, basically, if we ban looking for oil and gas and we run out of it, then what are our alternatives? Well, hopefully, we will end up with some sort of magical new hydrogen or solar or some other source of energy. But if we don't, the alternative is to burn more Indonesian coal. I mean, that's realistically what will happen, and carbon emissions will go up. So, if you ask the basic questions, you never would have done the oil and gas ban. But unfortunately, the governments often don't ask those questions, and we get bad laws. So there endeth the sermon, and that's why we've got to increase the quality of regulation. Brian here says Trump's rule: for every regulation, you must get rid of 2 existing rules. Brian, I would love to support that, but I know just a little bit about how bureaucrats think. The net effects of that law over time is that the average law will become 3 times longer, enough for the length of the law that's being introduced, and then another 2 times longer to replace the ones that have just been made up. So sounds great, really good rhetorically. In practice, it's just a way to make sure that you have longer and more complex rules. And the fundamental problem with it is you can't define a rule. But look, I've got on enough about that. I just want to come to another question for Mark, which Mark is more about the situation after COVID. So a lot of beating up on rural New Zealand for a long time. A lot of political parties going after urban votes. How has that attitude changed? People say that the attitude has changed in recent times. Is there a different approach to the rural sector since COVID, or is it all just lip service?
Oh, look, to be quite candid with you, I think there's a genuine reality shift where people now acknowledge just how hard you guys work. But it's been a long time coming. It's a real travesty that it's taken something like COVID-19 to sort of bring us to the fore of where we once sat. If we go back 2 or 3 election cycles, we're actually a valuable part of New Zealand society. And over the last 12 or so years, that's eroded away. It is lovely that we're finally getting the acknowledgement that we deserve. And I've always been a big advocate for you guys doing what you do so damnably well. So I will always say this: stay at it because you're bloody good at it. And as Kiwis, we tend to be pretty much the best and the most environmentally farmers in the world. It's just a shame that we haven't had a fair run at the wicket from, well, certainly the current government and perhaps the one before it. So, yeah, look, I can't advocate enough for how damnably good you are at what you do.
Well, we certainly try our best, Mark. Can I go back to the mental health issue? You've been quite poignant and mentioned several times the number of your colleagues that over your 32-year career as a dairy farmer?
Correct.
32 years.
Correct.
And you've had to actually see a number of your colleagues take their life. There's something about farming. I guess maybe it's the remoteness. Maybe it's the fact that you have it all on the line. You don't work for a big organization, and you're quite vulnerable to things beyond your control, like prices and weather. I don't know. I'm just sort of spitballing here, but there seems to be a reason why rural people have greater stresses from mental health than perhaps urban people. Can you talk a bit about that and what the solutions might be?
Well, yeah, I can, and I can talk it on at a personal level, and 2 realities. 2 things. It's a 2 sort of pronged answer I could give to the audience. Not only have I buried 4 of my friends, but I was actually medicated in my very early 30s for depression, and it was to do with just my lack of self-belief. Now, I'm not one for conflation or making the story seem better than it is. It's just the truth of the matter. My self-esteem eroded. The harder I worked, the less I felt valued. A large part of that is, it's weather conducive and other things. But I really think we've got to have an honest conversation because we're damnably good at what we do. We know that our land is our canvas, and quite often it's a lifelong investment. And routinely we're at odds with where we're going in our futures. And we really need to have a good hard look about mental health in New Zealand, but especially in rural space. We don't get the advocacy, we don't get the support. Quite often you'll go to some sort of medical establishment and unfortunately the mental health system is broken down, or just sort of gives you a pill and tells you to bugger off. Well, that's not good enough. We are quite often left in the dark with it, and many of my farmers, including a lot of the guys watching this, will have experienced it, and we've got to fix it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And look, I'm really looking forward to talking more about ACT's mental health policy as we go towards the election. Brooke van Velden, as well, our deputy leader, but also our health spokesperson, has got a fantastic policy there. And her basic insight, because in ACT we do problem solving, her basic insight is you've got $2 billion a year of taxpayer money. Not a bad investment, but no one's happy with it. Why is that? Basically because you've got 20 odd funders in the form of DHBs, also the Ministry of Health in itself. They're all sprinkling that $2 billion in different places with different sets of rules. So if you're a provider, often you have to deal with multiple contracts, very frustrating. And if you're a patient, often you find yourself in a place where only one provider is actually, I've just got a comment there from Mike Vickers that I think is very accurate, unfortunately. But if you're a provider, a patient in an area, often you find that your DHB funds a provider that you don't think is very good. But meanwhile, with all these different funders of mental health, you actually don't have much in the way of oversight to see if they're getting a decent outcome or result. So here's the thing. You've got lots of funders, lots of confusion, nobody getting value for money. And from the point of view of the providers, enormous frustration that they have multiple contracts and it's not clear who they're dealing with or what they have to do to perform and keep their contract. So this is the basic problem. It's all too fragmented. No one's looking out for the value for the taxpayers' money. No one's trying to make sure that the mental health dollar goes as far as possible. And what ACT is proposing is to take that $2 billion and put it in one nationwide organisation.
Sorry, David, we seem to be having some technical issues.
Oh, are we, mate? Is it not coming through?
Are you there, David?
Yeah. No, I'm good. You've disappeared. All right. Well, we've just lost our main man from rural New Zealand, but we'll carry on. And so Mental Health and Addictions New Zealand, or MHANZ, would be a one-stop funder for mental health in New Zealand. They'll fund only the best. They'll be good at drawing contracts. They'll fund a range of providers in any given place, and they'll use good data to make sure they're getting value for money. So we're not going to put more money in. You can't just throw money at problems. But what we are going to do is ensure that we get the best people contracted to provide the services in each area and make sure that we actually do the job or get the job done in a quality way. So, mental health reform is really key to the ACT Party, and it's something that's very valuable in rural New Zealand. There's a figure here, something here I just want to answer by Ian Scown. Why is the Labour Party hiding the suicide figures? I can't find them anywhere, and I'm sure they're hiding them. I think some people have been asking, what's been happening lately, and they're curious, they're concerned that, a lot of the trauma has led to an increase in suicide. There is a really good reason for that, and I just want to make it clear because some people don't know. It's a really sad thing, but, it often takes a year before the coroner can confirm, that a suicide was indeed a suicide. So the reason that the statistics don't come up for a while is just the nature of it. So it's really sad. But I just want to say, if people think there's a conspiracy or something, I'm always keen to tell you when there's not, and there's a good reason for something, and that's the answer in this case. So look, that leaves us probably near half an hour, and probably not in a bad space to wrap up. But I just want to remind people, if you've joined us in the second half of this, this is Mark Cameron. He's an unmitigated bloody legend. He actually gave his speech at the ACT Party campaign launch on the Auckland waterfront, downtown at the ASB Waterfront Theatre. And he did it wearing red bands and a suit. It's the kind of guy he is. He's a successful Ruawai dairy farmer. of 32 years experience. I know there's a few people in the live audience at Morrinsville who are AGS old boys, and I can tell you Mark's one of those too. So if he survived that, he can survive anything. And actually, he's a Tibbs House hostel boy too, so it's extra survival value that he's got. Rachel Jane is saying, "Show us your red bands." I don't know if Mark's got them on right now.
I'd love to, but I actually don't. I've got my town clothes on.
Here we go. So, but here's the thing. A couple of nights ago, there was a poll from UMR that had ACT at 5.9%. Now that would actually get Mark into Parliament. So if you're giving your party vote for ACT, the MP that you're voting for to get at the margin right now is Mark Cameron. And people say, what's the quality of the people that you're bringing in? I can't think of a more relevant or higher quality voice to bring in right now than Mark Cameron. So that's the kind of thing that people are voting for. And I really hope that a lot of people will give a party vote for ACT, because a party vote for ACT is a vote to do real RMA replacement. Every national leader says they're going to do it. ACT is the only party that's there making them do it each time. And this time, there's so few other parties around, we're actually going to have the numbers where they have to do it. The next thing is we've got to be honest about freshwater regulation, Zero Carbon Act. We've got to ensure that the newfound respect for rural New Zealand actually translates into policy change, and particularly with the Zero Carbon Act, particularly with the freshwater regulations. Those are things that ACT is actually committed to doing. So we're really looking forward to getting that stuff done. And then when it comes to mental health, a party vote for ACT is real structural reform in the way it's funded and delivered, because right now you're putting $2 billion in and it just ain't working. So lots of good reasons to give your party vote for ACT. And there's always a bonus. I always like to reply to people, will ACT revoke for the changes made under urgency to the Residential Tenancies Act? Margaret, that's absolutely critical. I just want to talk about this for a moment. I know it's off topic, but it makes me so angry. And I say this as someone who infamously or famously is actually a tenant, because my property ownership gets reported by Parliament every year, so everyone knows I rent. I'm opposed to these laws, and all tenants should be opposed to them, because fundamentally landlords have other investment opportunities, but tenants often don't have other accommodation opportunities. So every time the government makes a stupid law that makes it less attractive to be a landlord, what happens is that there's fewer landlords and higher prices for people who want to rent. So it's the most insane legislation that this government has put in place. And like so often with this government, the intentions are difficult to criticise. They really do want to give people who rent an easier time, but you don't judge policy by intentions, you judge policy by outcomes. So a party vote for ACT is a vote for sensible regulation, and in this case, a vote to get the Residential Tenancies Amendment Act reversed, and I think that is absolutely critical. I just want to acknowledge something Maya Deedman's saying. It's true, for the first time perhaps ever in a major poll, we have got ACT as the third party. I think that's absolutely exciting, and it shows just how much influence we can have with ACT's ideas. Matthew Percival's asking, Mark, this is a question for you. If Mark gets into Parliament, will you put him onto Dancing with the Stars? Well, first of all, no, I wouldn't, because this is the party of freedom.
No. Short version. Look, that's hilarious. Look, I'd certainly wear my red bands. If I was allowed, I'd give it some serious consideration. There you are.
I'll give you some advice, which is probably don't. But anyway, look, this has gone on a bit longer than we planned, but we're really grateful for everyone's questions. We apologise to the folks in Morrinsville who have had to watch this broadcast rather than having us there in person where we'd like to be. But we're really hopeful that in the next 24 hours we're going to get some really good news that actually they have managed to test and trace to the end of these chains of transmission, that the virus and the people with it are isolated, and we can all get back on to get on with our lives. So we're going to wrap up there, but really appreciate everyone for giving us their time. And Mark, you're an unmitigated bloody legend, and we can't wait to get you into Parliament.
Thanks, guys. I'm trying to find the camera. Stay farming, guys. Be well. Stay well.